Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. This is Sean Berry. I'm one of the meeting organizers. We're going to go ahead and get started here on time. I want to introduce Larry Sampson, today's presenter and our in-house expert on intelligent design control for medical. Larry, can you please go ahead and talk to your background and what you'll be covering today?
Yeah, super. Thanks, Sean. Excited to talk to you all today. This is all our masterclass about intelligent design control. And I just, a little bit of my background, I'm a director for medical device business processes inside of Siemens. And my background is I used to be a chief operating officer for a medical device firm here in Denver. So my background is really clean sheet design. I've been in medical device for 25, 30 years. Everything from clean sheet medical design work all the way through production and post-market surveillance. So I have a pretty broad view of how medical devices are developed and brought into production and used in the field. So hopefully that'll bring a little bit of context to our discussion today. Just wanted to say too that there's a couple things just to order of business. I don't know if we're starting this webinar series, and we're hoping to, once we get out of this COVID isolation process, we'd like to carry this out to people in the field. And we're going to do a series of trips around the country. So if you have any interest, we're going to do what we call a lunch with Larry. We're going to start having this discussion in these locales. And we'll extend the discussion past design into, or design controls into design authoring and a whole bunch of different activities. So if you have an interest in this, visiting your spot, we'd be happy to do that. Maybe we can have do it at a brew pub or something, have a few beers and bring in some experts and have a discussion about a variety of different topics. And also, if you have ideas on topics, I'd be interested to hear that as well. So just drop us a text if you'd like us to put you on our list. So second thing, and at the end of this webinar, we're going to have a drop sheet, so you're going to have the ability to visit the webinar on demand. In addition to that, you can opt into, using that functionality, you can opt into this process where we're going to provide you with more and more content as time goes along. So just to let you know, hopefully that'll be a lot of fun, and look forward to seeing you in person. So next slide is really about, we're going to start with a discussion about MDR, and the reason for that is MDR has this requirement for post-market surveillance, and one of the reasons that we want to develop our design control in a particular way is to conform and provide us with the functionality that's necessary to connect to our post-market surveillance activities. So I'm just going to talk about that a little bit here just to start with. Essentially, everyone already integrates risk on some level. So conformance with the 14971 standard is something that's critical to medical device development work. And so this is a pretty common thing, whether it's done in paper or manually. One way or another, people develop this conformance. But MDR is really getting to a place where they're asking for things that are deeper than they have in the past. And so there's this requirement in Article 92 that we do a statistical analysis on the frequency or severity of incidents that are not serious incidents. We kind of see this as a sea change in that in the past, we've been able to focus on serious incidents, which really narrows the scope of our risk management activities. In the case, though, now where we're looking at the whole stack, so not just serious incidents, but everything in the risk management system. And not only that, but we need to do some analysis of that data to understand what kind of alerts we're going to generate as part of the development and have a programmatic approach to doing post-market surveillance. This post-market surveillance data needs to land someplace. And essentially what we're going to do is use our design control as the smart, intelligent key to put that data into context. And so as we develop a system around doing post-market surveillance, we're going to grab all of this data that's out there. And a lot of times, I've been at a bunch of different companies. There's a very common way to handle our post-market activities is really to focus on the complaint system. But as you're looking at this slide, you're going to see there's a whole variety of other kinds of data out there that don't specifically key in the discussion about, it's not just about complaints, because complaints are sort of a processing of the data. And once we determine that it constitutes negative feedback, then we put it in the complaint system. But we also have edge IT, edge devices, Internet of Things. So data coming back directly from the devices. We have production data, we have customer data in hospital systems, regulatory databases, so all kinds of different data sources. And what we want to be able to do is aggregate those data sources into a data lake, do analytics on the data lake so we can correlate the data and join the data. And once we understand that, it would create signals that would then be keyed back into the risk management system. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more over time here about how to structure the risk management system so that the data coming back from the field is keyed, and we have contextualization and visualization of the data and how it relates to the product performance. So all this is just to say it's very important that we get this risk management and our design definition squared away so that as we start to think about holistically how these tools work across your systems, that we have a great system for doing that. So, I'm just going to go ahead and move on and talk about intelligent design control. When we talk about intelligent design control inside of Siemens, we really think of it in three pillars. Today's discussion is really about design definition, but the other two are design verification, validation, and risk management. And so design definition is really all about model-based controls. In addition to that, when we talk about mitigation strategies, how are we going to mitigate the design, we want to make sure that all the different requirements are included. We want labeling requirements, we want all the different disciplines, mechanical, electrical, software requirements. We want to have a holistic understanding of what those requirements are and how they apply to the design as part of the whole system. In addition to that, we want to integrate standards, and not only standards that are external standards, so ISO 60601 or 62304, whatever the standards are that are imposing requirements on our devices. In addition to that, we also want to have normative standards. So what is our internal understanding of how we're going to apply those external standards to our particular device? And so we want to have an understanding of those standards as well. And engineering reuse then becomes a very critical part of this. How is it that we're going to share this information from a library down into what might be 100 different products that we're developing at any one time? So that's the definition piece. That's what we're going to talk about today. Second tier is really design verification and validation. So we have this definition of good. What is our evidence that the device complies with that definition of good? So this is test case management, how to do test runs, automated test reporting, and the like. So that's really the second set, and that's be our second topic next time around. And then the third topic is, now that we've defined the design and we've got evidence in the traceability, how do we put that in the context of user risk? And so this is, of course, the first subject is really this 14971 compliance question. But in addition to that, we want to have a progression of FMEAs that come off of that data model so that we understand what is the sequence of events that could possibly lead to this hazardous situation, and how do we integrate those FMEA activities. And of course, that provides us with this intelligent key for post-market surveillance, and then we end up with a residual risk calculation as part of that. So finally, as we move into these, hopefully in the next month, or so, 2 months, we get done with this quarantine, and as we move into the on-site discussion, we're going to start bridging into our design excellence discussion, which is all about design authoring and a variety of different topics, how to handle your DHF DMR, system simulation, systems design, that kind of thing. So that hopefully provides you with a summary of what we're thinking about when we say design control. What is included in our intelligent design control processes? So just a brief discussion about value. Really, the primary value for segmenting and understanding design control is reuse. And reuse is a critical aspect because of a couple things. We need to have a data model that supports it, but in addition to that, we have to set the projects up in a way that makes sense so that they're reusable across the product types. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Speed is really related to visibility and contextualization of the data. So not only do we need to be able to reuse those artifacts, but I need to be able to get at the right information quickly. And this really goes to confidence that the regulatory people have in our process and whether we can answer questions quickly. Finally is really error proofing and automation and workflow management. This is all about the quality of the data underlying the system. So it's fine to be productive and fast, but if the data underlying everything is poor, then it really doesn't matter how fast we are because it's all just wrong. So we want to talk a little bit about error proofing and automation. Finally, we would hope that if we get these first three right, that should improve our regulatory velocity. So how fast do we get our new product introductions through the process? And also, can we respond to those issues that are identified in the field quickly? And so that's really the value in this whole process. So I'm just going to go ahead and drop right into our discussion then about data management and how do we define good product. So design definition. A lot of companies come to us with a variety of different statuses here. Usually, big companies will have at least a system for managing a portion of this flowchart we have here. The flowchart really represents the 1998 FDA guidance on design control. And so what we have is a decomposition in design inputs from user needs to product requirements, which are satisfied by the design outputs. This is really the construction that they talk about. And of course, we have verification of using test cases to verify the requirements and validate the user needs. This is sort of the hierarchical construction that the FDA uses. Just as a point of note here, design inputs is something that's done very differently from discipline to discipline. So you might imagine that if you have a software development project, most software these days is developed with agile processes, more of a use case epic breakdown than it is a user need to product requirements breakdown. So one of the things that we want to understand is when we talk about design inputs, there are a variety of different constructions, and we need to have the ability to merge those data models in a way that allows us to report on everything. So, this is just a simple construction. I put it in for the purposes of illustration to comply with the FDA's view of things, but just realize that inside this design inputs, there's a lot of different constructions that are required. In addition to that, we have product sources, and those product sources are typically external standards, but also company SOPs, and we need a construction for that. I'll talk about that in a minute here. So finally, once we have these design inputs developed, those design inputs aren't just refinements of one another, they're also the control plan or the mitigations to the occurrence of hazardous situations. And so what we also need is a risk management system that allows us to integrate into the data model how problems can occur to users and what we're doing in the design of the device to mitigate the occurrence of that hazardous situation. So this is really the general construction of how we define the design and the data elements in the design. And very important to get this set up in a way that makes sense to your product. You can imagine that the design input construction looks very different for a mechanical setup. So if you're going to do a disposable, for example, one of our customers is an orthopedic implant company. You can imagine that they have user needs and requirements, but they don't have software requirements. They don't have electrical requirements, but they do have labeling requirements. So there's a variety of different constructions that are required for doing different types of design. Whereas if you're doing a robotical surgical system where you have software, hardware, you have epic sort of use case breakdowns, and you have mechanical breakdowns, and all that's related to risk, it becomes more complicated, and you have to account for that. So different constructions for different types of projects. This is just a quick report example of how this kind of construction can happen. We have a user need that goes to system design and design specification. So we have a 4-level requirements breakdown, just as an example. And now we have test cases, and those test cases are related to the level of requirement that is required. So you might have a requirement or a test case, a verification test case that's associated with a design requirement or a system requirement. But also we have these validation test cases that are really different in construction. We are going to be testing the finished device with end users rather than sort of bench testing. That's more along the lines of verification testing. And of course, we also want to have linkages to the bill of materials. So how are we going to trace these functional requirements, these functional understandings? How do we map those into the bill of materials so that we understand, specifically in the design, what is being satisfied by, by which part and which subassembly. So just a design hierarchy breakdown that's a big part of building out the system in a way that allows you to provide that visibility, right? What is it? If I have a problem with a seal, then what parts does that link to? And then in the end, what user need is related to that, so we understand how it relates then in risk. So we'll talk about risk at another session, but risk is all integrated with this data model. Okay, so I'm going to just talk for a few minutes about reuse and how to construct a library system that would allow you to reuse these artifacts and provide traceability into your standards. And so this construction, we're going to start with specifications, which are really external standards. And so you might think in terms of 60601, which is electrical device, electrical medical devices, requirements for electrical medical devices. Another example might be 60601 or 62304, which is software for medical devices, right? So we have these external standards, and the external standards update on a cadence that we don't really control. So we might have 60601 2007, and then at some point in time they update to 2012. And so we don't really control the update of those documents. They occur at a cadence that we don't control, as I said a minute ago. So we have a library that keeps track of those. What is it that the external standards require? Now, in addition to that, we have what we're going to call a normative standard library. And what that normative standard library is for is to abstract the specifications from our product types. And this really becomes an internal understanding of how the specifications or these standards, external standards, should be applied. And so what we're going to do is we're going to provide traceability, elemental traceability to the standards and the norms. And so the different standards oftentimes step on one another. Usability is a good example of that. 60601 has some requirements. I think it's -6, and then we have the medical device standard, that is the usability standard. And a lot of times when you're reading through these standards, you'll find that the language is slightly different, or they have different requirements related to this particular thing that we're talking about. And so what we do is we map on an atomic level, we map those requirements into our understanding of what we're going to do for this particular device type. And so this new normative standard is that abstraction. We go through the standards, we understand how we're going to apply them to the product type, and we define that in the normative standards. So each one of these normative standards, as we're developing the library, we develop the library with the idea that we're going to apply this across all the different products of a product type. And once we do that and we develop the document, we release this document, we approve it, release it, review it, approve it, release it, and now it's ready to be shared down into the projects. So when we do that, what we're going to do is we're going to take this document, which is a grouping, right? And just incidentally, when we talk about documents, we're talking about collections of work items. And so these work items might be test cases, they might be requirements, they might be risk items, hazardous situations and harms, but it's a grouping of work items with all the linking relationships established between those work items. So this provides us a pretty comprehensive understanding of what we need out of the device to provide that compliance with the standard. So we're going to take that grouping, we're going to share it down into a project, and we're going to do that for a variety of different documents. And what that does is it provides us with an instantaneous understanding for this product type of what our application of the standard should be. We're going to do that for more than one project. So there's really three reasons we construct the library this way. The first one is really we want to abstract the requirements that we control from the ones we don't. So we control the normative requirements, but the specifications that are coming from the field are updated at that cadence that we don't control. So we need an abstraction of those two different activities. This is typically done, I've seen this done in many cases, and in my previous life as a developer, I'll go to the quality organization and I'll say, hey, we're developing this new type of device. What standards do we need to be compliant with? And we would take the standards, we go through clause by clause in an Excel spreadsheet, and we'd say, okay, paragraph 1.3 applies, it doesn't apply, what's our justification, and how are we going to handle it in the design? So what we're really saying here is we're going to build this into the traceability. And so that as these specifications get updated over time, we persist the links between these different documents and the different libraries, the different projects, and those persistent links then create a situation where we can update the documents over time and maintain that traceability. So second thing is really the norms library allows us to process the requirements differently for a product group than the products individually. And so you can imagine that when we think about reuse and how it's going to be done, libraries of reuse by definition are applied to many different projects. And so you can imagine that what we're doing at the project level is specific to that particular project, but when we develop the normative standards, it's across a product type. So as an example, if we're developing a sterilization process for pacemakers, we might have different understanding and different ways that we apply the 11135, like EO sterilization process might be different for pacemakers than it is for Band-Aids. And maybe it's the same, but maybe it's not. But what we want is the normative standard to apply to all the different pacemakers that we're going to be developing. So we might have a little bit of a different view at that library level than we do at the project level. And so we need that abstraction to understand the difference between them. The third thing is the norms are updated to new revisions at a different cadence than the projects. And so what we really want to do at the project level, if we say we share this labeling document down as a version A in project number 1, and then over time, this document, the normative standard, gets updated to revision B and revision C. What we want to do then is create a new project, and this project number 2 is going to be shared at this version C. So what we want to be able to do at project 1 is at a cadence that makes sense for the project. We want to be able to look up to the norms library and say, are there any new revisions of this normative standard that have been shared or released as part of the library? And I want to assess that, do a differential between the version that I'm on and the version that is currently approved, and say, does it make sense for me at this point in time to update to this new revision C or not? And provide that flexibility at the project level to understand that new changes are available, but I can update those changes at a cadence that makes sense to me. And so this abstraction really makes a ton of sense for doing reuse inside of large companies, because we have many different projects and a lot of times it's geographically dispersed. So one client has a facility in Boston and they have another facility in Singapore. If we have that kind of a situation, we really need an abstraction and a global tool that allows us to share all these library references in a way that is approved and makes sense and is at a cadence that makes sense to the project. So this is really important, by the way, that when we talk about linking between projects, what we want is a tool that doesn't replicate those requirements into the projects. Rather, we want linking relationships across them. It's a very important thing, because it becomes a mess with replicated work items all over the place. So if we replicate this A requirement into project number 1, what ends up happening is we have to update that work item as time goes along. And what we really want is to link between these projects so that we end up with a persistent link that as these normative standards get updated over time, we don't lose the linking relationship between the current version of the work item. So just in future reference here, if we want to do this well, we really need to be able to provide linkages between the projects, not just replication. So I'm just going to dump into a couple reports here just for information's sake. This is a norms library down to projects report that we have. Great example. So essentially what this report does is look at all the normative standards and says, hey, what revisions or versions have been approved of this standard in the library, and where have those been shared to, and at what revision. So we shared revision or the approved version 2.0 down to this design control project, and this is the name of the project and we can follow the link. So we know specifically which normative standard has been shared to which project under what revision. Very difficult to keep track of this in current situations. Very, if it's not part of the traceability, it's hard to know where you've shared these documents and what the traceability is. Incidentally, if we look up from the norms library, this traces to the standards library. So if I want to do traceability now and understand how project number 1 is now traced and is satisfied by how the standard is satisfied by that project, it's just a matter of simple traceability. In addition to that, at the project level, we're going to have test cases that are linked to the requirements in that project. And so not only that, we have the test case and the test execution as part of the traceability as well. So it's just a report now to say how is project 1 compliant with the 60601 standard as an example. So very, very powerful reporting once we get it into the traceability. Second, this is just a report from the project up. So what are all the normative standards that have been shared into this project? Where were they shared from? What revision were they shared from? And not only that, but do we have a later approved version that's available in the library? If so, then I can select the 2 documents and do a compare document, and they'll give me a red line so I understand what the difference between those documents is. And if I want to update that document to the current revision, you just click on Update Document. It's going to pull this new version of the document down into the project. So very powerful management strategy to being able to keep track of everything that's going on in your reuse scenarios. So I'll just finish up here. We're coming up on the half an hour. I want to keep this a short conversation. In 2 discussions, we're going to talk a little bit about risk management. And so this data model that I talked about, the deconstruction of the design, what we're going to do is talk about how risk analysis is mitigated by our design control strategy. And that design control, each one of these requirements ends up being a control that's informed by the FMEA process. So here over time, in the next couple sessions, we're going to talk about this in detail, how to construct it, and how to provide traceability from all of your different controls up to the risk analysis. I think it's a really great conversation. Looking forward to having that one. And then finally, I'm going to have a quick discussion here about systems modeling. And so our systems modeling tool, this is typically how systems modeling tools work, is it's a graphical association of the functionality of the device in levels. And so we have a system in our construction. We have an operational level, which deconstructs into a systems and a logical and a physical level. And essentially what the output of that systems modeling function is, it's literally a list of functions. So what are the actors going to do? So what are our users of the device going to do functionally? But in addition to that, what is the system going to accomplish, design components? And what we need is a way to map those functions into our control strategy. So what I like to say is risk management is really a negative view of the design. And what we're doing is we're developing a set of an understanding of what can go wrong with the user and what our controls are going to be to assure that that doesn't happen. So that's really a negative view of the design. Systems modeling is really the positive view. What do we need this system to do? What do we expect it to do, and how does it operate? And the output of that is functions. So what we need is a model, a data model that informs both the positive view of the design and the negative view of the design. And the reason we do that is so when we're done with our set of controls, the controls are complete. This is the way we assure that we have everything into the control set that is both required for the function of the design and also to control risk. And of course, those functions then operate as what we use to allocate to the design authoring effort. So now I can author the design by allocating a function to the design. And so this serves as an interface function for traceability, and it also serves to press on the design folks to provide them with an understanding of what it is exactly they need to be designing. So that is my design decomposition, design definition summary. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about the next sessions. Our next session, so this is the April 9th, design definition. Our next one's going to be on verification and validation. We're going to talk about test case management and how this definition of our set of controls leads to definition of test cases and execution of those tests. And then finally, on April 23rd, 2 weeks from now, we're going to talk about risk management and how to integrate risk management into our design efforts. And that'll hopefully conclude our design control masterclass. But what I would really like to do is just extend this and go directly. Hopefully by that time we're feeling better about COVID. We may do another section of sessions here remotely if it's required, but if not, hopefully we'll get out to in-person meetings and start lunches with Larry, and we'll get into some design authoring discussions as well. So please sign up for our sessions here. I'll be thrilled to have you be a permanent member of this, and we can have many discussions in the future about risk management and various different medical device configurations and processes. So thanks so much for your time. It looks like we're pretty close to the half an hour. Hopefully I respected your time, and we'll be looking forward to our next discussion. Yeah, so Sean, did you have any comments?
Thank you very much. No, I was just saying thanks, Larry. Appreciate it. And thanks to everyone that's taking half an hour of the day to join us. We're looking forward to continuing discussion, as Larry said, and look out for some of us to be reaching out to you individually to capture your feedback and thoughts and hear what you had to say about this first session. So nonetheless, thanks to everyone again, and have a great Thursday and enjoy the weekend. Stay safe.